Hey everybody. Tonight we are looking at my Black Ghost Knifefish tank. Before that it was my T-bar tank, and before that it was my African tank. This is probably the first tank I actually really put any thought into when I put it together. In fact, it definitely is the first tank I really put any thought into. I went to great lengths to collect the wood. All of the rocks I collected myself. I spent quite a lot of time collecting what was going to go into the tank, and then over the years the plants have sort of grown in and changed a little here and there. But this was the first tank that I ever really sat down and designed and planned a community that was going to go in it, rather than just sort of slapdash putting it together as I went along and buying random fish. So what I originally did was set up a pseudo-African sort of community, and the fish that are now, or a lot of the fish that are now in my 125, started out in this tank. The planting was a little bit different, but not a lot. And then otherwise, the hardscape, where the woodwork is and where the rocks are, is where they've been since day one. And I spent several days trying different positions and moving the rocks around to get them in different locations to give it different visual appeal. And the one thing I will say that I did poorly with this tank is I didn't have much experience with fish keeping at the time and tank maintenance. And while I put it together to look beautiful, it's got detritus traps everywhere. It's a really difficult tank to maintain and keep clean. I do regret that, and well, I guess I can't say I regret that necessarily. I learned from that. My tanks now, my 125 for example, does not look as good as this as far as I'm concerned, but it's a lot easier to maintain. It's a lot more free-flowing. There's a lot less areas for detritus to collect, and so on and so forth. Again, this was just sort of lack of experience that wound up putting this tank together for me. I don't have anything really in particular on my mind. I just want to talk about this tank a little while because this is one of my favorites, and I know I have a lot of new viewers since the last time I probably sat down and really just sort of talked about this tank and how I feel about it and why I set it up the way I did. The other thing I would like to mention about the way I set my tanks up, and this one's a great example, is I don't particularly necessarily follow the rules of planting in a tank. I don't do this in my gardens. And I don't do it in my fish tanks either. To me, these are more or less just aquatic gardens that have fish swimming around in them. You could look at them either or. It's either a fish tank with plants or it's a garden with fish. Either way, it works out the same in the end. They both work together in the environment. So in a standard garden, whether it's in your fish tank or not, you tend to put the low-growing plants in the front, the medium-growing plants in the mid-ground, and the taller plants in the back. And as you can see with my tank, it doesn't necessarily work out that way. In fact, that temple plant right there, front and center, is one of the tallest, biggest plants in the tank, and it's right up front. And it does block your view, and it does prevent you from seeing into the back of the tank a little bit. But what it also does is it gives you a much more natural feel that you're looking at a real environment. I spend a lot of time out in the woods. I spend a lot of time out on the water, fishing and kayaking. And you don't see landscapes where all of the short bushes grow right in front of you, and then the medium tall plants grow a little further away, and then the tall trees are off in the distance. That's just not realistic. And I like my tanks to look very natural. And so when I set it up to be both pleasing to the eye, but also to look very natural. The way I have the rocks in there, I know it's kind of hard to tell now with all the plants that have finally started to grow in really thick. They look like what you might see in the ground. They don't look artificial. They don't look like I've positioned them that way. And it took a great deal of positioning and a lot of time for me to finally get them in a position that looked like it just sort of happened naturally and didn't have anything to do with me affecting it. The wood is the same way. I spent a great deal of time rearranging that wood and making all the lines flow the way I wanted them to, and it really gives a nice 3D quality to this tank. It is also a 40 breeder, which gives me that 18-inch depth, and that helps. It gives me the ability to give it a three-dimensional feel to it. But, sometimes in the real world, you've got bushes that are in the way, and the animal you're trying to watch walks behind the bush, and you have to wait for it to come out the other side. That's just how it goes sometimes. I don't necessarily want my aquariums to look like photographs of fish. I want them to look like real world environments that have fish moving around in them. That's why I always provide plenty of cover and plenty of hiding places for my fish. I know a lot of people like to think that if they provide scant cover, then they'll see their fish more. And I'm of the belief that if you give a fish more places to hide, you'll see them more because they feel more secure and they're not sort of forced to stay in their hiding place all day, because otherwise they'd be in a big wide open tank. If you give them a tank like this, whether you're using artificials or you're just using hardscape without any plants, but if a fish has a lot of security and feels comfortable, you'll see them more. Now, in my case, my black ghost knife fish, who I've been hoping would make an appearance during all this, because I did throw some pellets in there a little while ago, and he stuck his head out a couple times, and usually that's an indication that any minute now he's going to start coming out and swimming around. He's fairly shy, and I think he sort of grew up that way. He's been in this tank for a long time, a few years now, and was always bullied around by one fish or another that was in here. That's why it's no longer my T-bar tank, is the T-bar just harassed him no end. And I finally got the T-bar out so we would see the black ghost knife fish more. And while we do see it more, it's still not an outgoing fish. We don't see it all the time. So there we go. There's his little head sticking out. So in a nutshell, I don't worry about whatever the rules say about the way you're supposed to position this or the way you're supposed to plant that. I go by what is practical to maintain. Obviously, you've got to deal with things like lighting and water circulation and, you know, nutrients, etc., etc. You've got to have the right environment for the plants, but then where you position them in a tank, as far as I'm concerned, that's up to you. You know, there's nothing that says you have to put the taller plants in the back of your tank. If you don't like the way they look back there, you don't have to put them back there. And I just sort of don't. I don't even really worry about those kind of rules. I set things up the way I like them to look. When I set all my tanks up, I never once considered that I'd be even shooting YouTube videos of them. I just set them up because I was going to be the one sitting here enjoying them. And because of that, they look the way they do. These have never been set up to be presentation tanks. These have been set up to be my fish tanks. So, you know, I've said all along with my channel, that's all my channel's ever meant to be anyway, is just sort of bringing you all along for the ride. I'm not necessarily here to say this is how to do it or not how to do it. I'm just here to say this is how I do it. And this is what the result is. So, you know, take what you want from that. Anyway, again, nothing really on my mind. I just wanted to sort of chat about this tank and give everybody a good long look at it, because it really is one of my favorite tanks. It's really pretty. It's taken a while for the plants to really sort of get in there and start growing. I've tried several other plants that kind of did their thing but didn't really make it for very long, and eventually, you know, just sort of faded away. The stuff I have in there now is apparently what's going to do well. You can even see on this piece of wood all the way in the back, I've got a piece of Anubias that's rooted in and growing. That has been there for so long and has finally actually started to take off and grow. I had given up on that thing so long ago, I couldn't believe it. And then I've even got some Val back there that's actually planted, sort of nestled down into the notch in the wood. And then, of course, I've got some more Anubias down here coming up through the Val. I think that's Val. It's been so long since I put it in there, I can't even remember. I know this temple plant is a recent addition. I just removed that from a different tank and stuck it in there because I thought it would look good. And I was right, at least in my opinion. I think it does look good. And then I've got some little Anubias over here on the side that's still hanging on. That's been in there since day one, since this tank started. Actually, all this Val's been in here since day one, too. And then this Java has been in here since day one and is finally rooted in. You can still see where I've got some of that green slime cyanobacteria growing in there. I got in there the other day and really cleaned that out and vacuumed it out as best I could. But there's still some in there. So as usual, it's just maintenance. I just got to keep on top of getting in there and cleaning it out. It's not hurting anything. And in fact, I don't even really worry too much about the way it even looks. Again, I don't mind the natural appearance of everything. In fact, I like the natural appearance of everything. So it's always that fine balance between overgrown, too much algae that's making it look unattractive versus enough algae that it makes it look natural. So I'll call that good. I will thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please subscribe so you don't miss anything else I got coming up. You never know what you're going to get with me. Once again, I thank you for watching this one, and I'll see you real soon on the next one.